Aloha, and welcome to another Candid Conversation. I'm pleased to be with Sara Hanks today, and we're going to be dealing with a blog that she's posting soon on continuous improvement, which she titles as Start from the Middle, which in my case is rather ample, but I don't think that's what she means. So Sara, how about you tell us what the heck that means?
Sure. So just a little bit of background about myself. For the last decade or so, I've been driving projects, and most of that was actually funded from the CEO. So these were initiatives that were tops down. They were great because anytime you needed somebody to make a change that was a little resistant, you had this club, right, given from your senior leadership to help kind of push things along. And when the company that I worked for was acquired, the idea of my role, it didn't fit into their organization, so it changed. And then so COVID hit, my org got dismantled. And they left me with a small team of project leaders, no budget. And we continued to find continuous improvement opportunities and drive those things to closure. And, whereas some of my peers we were effective at doing it, and things looked a little differently. So when I think about people that I work with and I find that they're maybe stuck or maybe grumpy or feeling like their manager isn't supporting the types of things that they want to do to improve, I think that doesn't have to be an excuse, and that you can drive continuous improvement from within the middle management layer of a company and eventually make enough progress on those projects that you'll get the recognition and understanding of your senior leadership and ultimately the support to drive that change. And I've lived it for the last almost 3 years. So I think it's something that I just wanted to share what I've learned, so that others that may feel like they're in that position can also have impact.
And you're exposing the critical element of change or process improvement, that if you've got ownership executives that support it, life is a lot easier.
Yes.
But that's a rarity.
Yeah.
At least in my experience, it's a rarity. And what, in essence, starting in the middle opens up is kind of the Japanese Kaizen. Everybody has a responsibility, in my view, but has the opportunity to improve their job, their process, their operation.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not there's budget, secondary issue. Whether or not there's time, all of us can squeeze time somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that your blog is kind of exposing that, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever read Paul Akers' 2-Second Lean?
Yes. I should include that in the April newsletter as a book to read.
It's a great book. It's a really easy read. And I love his perspective that, just fix what bugs you. And if everybody just does a little bit incrementally every day, you will ultimately look back and think, oh, wow, we've really made a big difference. And I think, I would definitely recommend that book.
Yeah, I think what bugs you is I characterize it as sore spots. What keeps you up at night? What wakes you up at night when you're worrying about something? And everybody's got these things.
Everybody. There's no shortage of
what drives me crazy is that if there is something bugging you, why don't you fix it?
Yeah.
People tend not to. You remember my 5 things? Give me 5 things that you can do that'll make your job better. Give me 5 things that are a pain in the butt to do. Give me 5 things that'll make your life easier. The number of elements that are on all 3 lists that we are still there astounds me.
Yeah.
And you must see that every day.
Oh, all the time. All the time.
I don't know. I'm hopeful always that the millennials, the younger millennials, the X's and Z's and the alphas that are coming are going to be a lot more focused in that direction than my generation has been, and the older millennials. We've been change resistant.
Yeah. I mean, I think people find a lot of satisfaction in routine. And oh,
I have a hard time with that.
I do too. I don't think I would do well in a position where I was expected to just follow a routine.
That's why I got into consulting in my early 30s. The identification of an issue, the study of the issue, exposing the options, communicating the options, coming to a conclusion, then implementing. It was like lava, painfully slow.
Yeah.
In the consulting world, I could span projects, assignments a month apart. So it was not like I'm watching it every day, going in once a month. Well, there's progress. This is good.
You can feel a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the enemies from starting with the middle, because it's catch as catch can as a time element, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How can people organize their time to do this individually? Is there any magic that you found?
Well, I think before you talk about time, I think it's important to also talk about scope and what you want to work on, because I think that'll define how long it'll take. I'm implementing a project to put an asset tracking system in place. And the whole scope of being able to do that, where you're tracking the asset and you're connecting the data, it's a big project that has a lot of steps that are really important. And so rather than focusing on the total picture, I think if you're trying to drive change from the middle, it's important to break things down into smaller pieces, and identify ways that you can measure success of those smaller pieces. Maybe it's I'm working on the design element. Maybe I'm proving out process capability. Maybe I'm, whatever those things are that you need to do. I would recommend taking the big continuous improvement project, breaking it down into smaller measurable sections. And then I would carve out time in your week just to focus on that. I mean, I think, we've talked about indistractable, and I think that idea of time boxing and carving out time to do that. And I would set time aside where, you can go into that with a fresh set of thinking. Like for me, my best think times, I like Monday mornings. For me, I don't have a lot going on Monday morning, so I block a couple hours of my time to do focus work. And then also Friday afternoons until 3. After 3 o'clock, it's my brain
to think about cookies.
Yeah, exactly. I think about cookies and what I've got going on for the weekend.
It's funny, have you used a triptych at all? The AAA has a
AAA? Yeah.
If you think about your project as, okay, here's where I want to go. There's the end point. So I want to drive from Los Angeles to New York. There's no point in thinking of Los Angeles to New York. As triptych does, they take you in increments.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, you stop for a restroom break, you stop for a meal, you stop to sleep, you do all of these things, gas fill up. And in a project, you do the same thing. So I'm going to drive from LA to New York. It's going to take me 100 hours, whatever the heck the time period is. And I'm going to sleep 6 hours a night. So how long is it going to take me driving? Meals, blah, 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 blah. That's the same determination you do on the project. And now you're talking time chunking. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how that makes life easier, isn't it?
It really does. I used to pride myself on being the great multitasker.
Me too.
And it's a terrible habit.
Well, it also builds pressure.
Yeah.
It creates stress because you don't get those individual details done according to what you had originally planned. But if you use time chunks, it's much more positive.
And I never really think about the amount of waste that goes into ramping up and ramping down. when you're starting a task. So when you are multitasking or you allow yourself those interruptions to happen, like to get back into where your brain was is taxing. It's draining on your brain, and it takes time, and all of that can be avoided if you just focus on that specific task.
I just completed a redo on our labor efficiency class. And the enemy to efficiency in every case is interruptions. And on repair and maintenance tasks, they say it takes half an hour to an hour for a technician who's been taken off a job that he hadn't completed to get to the point that he can start up again. So it's a really,
That's a lot of productivity loss.
6.25% to 13%
Wow.
every day. And I want a minimum of 90% labor efficiency. So if you take a guy off a job, that's my number one rule in labor: never take a guy off a job he hasn't completed. And that means you never give him a task that's longer than 8 hours or a shift.
Right.
And in project management, process improvement, the same thing's true, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
That startups and wind down. The other thing about chunking is, okay, I've just taken up 50 minutes. I allocated an hour. I can't get the next task in 10 minutes done. I'm going to move on to the next chunk.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself doing that?
Sometimes.
See, that's, it's a hard habit to break, isn't it? When you're trying to do all multitasking things.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's remarkable. So on these tasks that you're dealing, starting at the middle, in the operation you're in now where you don't have funding, that gives you a license to proceed, doesn't it? Starting in the middle.
Yeah.
And how many are on your team doing this?
I have 3 plus myself.
So 4 of you doing different tasks. Are you able to do tasks that you can complete in a day? Can you break your process improvement projects down that tight?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think when you break things down, it could be that you need to prepare a PowerPoint presentation for an approval meeting, right? It could be preparing for a design review with the engineering team. It could be holding a 2-day process mapping session. And that's not 8 hours, but the agenda within that breaks down into specific things.
Do you always do a process map with your process?
Yes.
So how do people who aren't used to that? So your project leader goes out to the world, to a section of the company, and they're going to deal with a group of people that aren't used to process improvement. How do they deal with the creation of a process map? Is that intuitively easy for them, or is it difficult?
I think the challenge isn't in the activity of creating a process map. I think people can wrap their head around it. I think the challenge is that most processes, when you start to peel back the onion, don't tend to be linear. And there's like rework that gets exposed. And then organizational vagueness is a problem. You know, if it's not clear what the steps are and who's responsible to execute them and where are those handoffs, I think that's where the complexity comes into play in process mapping. But the whole point of the process mapping is to get clarity. So
exactly, that's a word that I was going to pop in. Clarity is missing on almost any process.
Yeah.
Typically, the same thing with job descriptions. You know, ideally the job description is a job function. What are the functions that you perform? And then for every one of those functions, wouldn't it be nice if I had a process map that everybody agreed upon?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes life a whole heck of a lot easier.
And, you know, and have a quality system to support it too, where you're auditing against the process map and identifying where either people are non-compliant and you can drive corrective action that way, or even better, if you realize, because things change over time and the process may be inefficient, maybe there's technology that could make things better. And
Yeah.
so looking back at it for compliance, but also opportunity to drive improvement is, I think necessary.
I used to struggle with that all the time. The job description is something that I don't think that businesses do all that effectively, and probably because they don't think of it in terms of identifying a function as much as trying to police the activity of the employee.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't believe, I think we've got a cross purpose goal with a job description, and then you go to performance standards, it's even worse.
Yeah.
I used to have a thing I called guidelines instead of policies and procedures, and the guideline would relate to one task or one piece of a process, and there'd be an owner. There's a data element. There'd be a frequency of review, when it was last done, if there's financial implications or not, and all the rest of this stuff. But in one of your blogs, you talked about the challenge of data accuracy.
Yeah.
That's another symptom of lack of clarity, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, yeah, if you have clarity, then you'll understand what data is important to drive which outcomes, and you would have the tools in place to make sure that that data is complete, accurate. Any movement of the data is done without compromise.
What do you think of a data dictionary? Is that something that you think is important or not?
I think that would be helpful. I would love to see a data dictionary. I think putting the investment into creating and maintaining it, I haven't seen where that's been done. But as a person who's spent most of my career problem solving and using data to help understand the root cause of an issue and then driving change, I love data and go right to the data.
It's kind of where you and I live. If I don't have data, I don't know what I've got.
Yeah.
Everybody's got opinions, it's like our nose, mine's too big, whatever it is. And ownership in, the data dictionary came in to business normalcy back probably in the 60s or 70s with computers and the advent of IBM's database packages, DB1 and 2, etc. But data ownership, that really exposed a sore spot.
Mm-hmm.
George owns the price of a part. Oh, okay. My Lord. Because all manner of people were changing prices.
Yeah.
It's chaos.
And that's, yeah.
It's
how
common.
do you predict your margin if everybody's allowed to change the price?
Well, and it's also worse because every element of the data dictionary, again, I don't want to take you off track and starting in the middle, but I need a definition. I need a description of what the heck that damn thing is that everybody can understand, accept, and be committed to.
Yeah.
And we typically don't deal well with that. When you're communicating on a process map with the team that is involved with it, I don't imagine that it's constantly approved that that's how it's done, or consistently approved that that's how it's done. Isn't there an argument in there?
Oh, absolutely. That's where it's helpful to get people in a conference room and describe it. I think it's a good idea to interview people ahead of time and do the pre-work, but if you really want to get everybody agreeing, then they need to be able to communicate together, and dispute things that they don't agree with, or clarify things that maybe are misconstrued, and really work towards, yes, this is what we agree our process is.
And then how frequently do we want to review and make sure that's still applicable?
I would say no more than 3-year review. Probably annual would be better
There
in
you
today's
go.
day and age.
Yeah, there you go. Especially, I call that people getting into ruts, or what I want them to look up over the wall because they
Yeah.
get into a track. DeSoto called it thinking outside the box. Just to be a pain, I call it think outside the triangle. But because we get into these routines and ruts, and we're, like you said, we're comfortable with that. We shouldn't be.
No, I think one of the biggest pet peeves I've ever had is like implementing a system to fix a process, like an IT system, and you implement it, and then 2 years later you request a change to it, and the response from the IT team is, well, we've already implemented it. And it's like, you should always have a provision in your plan to make improvements and changes over time, because there's always going to be a better way.
But people don't seem to have come to that conclusion yet. I think we're getting closer. I think the younger generations are much more attuned to that than my generations, the older generations. Do you notice that in companies that you're involved with?
I think there's definitely more aptitude to drive change, and I agree with that. But I think there's a lack of like problem solving thinking that's missing. And that's where I think, I've worked with a lot of people that are really good at problem solving, but they don't understand what technology can do for them, from in both analysis as well as solutions. Like, these are your Lean Six Sigma master black belts from the 90s. Like, they grew up in that world and they're fantastic problem solvers with critical thinking skills, but they don't understand what technology can do. And then you've got the younger generation that understands what technology can do, but might be jumping to a solution without really thinking about the root cause and are you solving the right thing? And I think that's what I want to do, is how do you take these two worlds and combine them together?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the presidents of the university that I've been dealing with, I asked him, what are the challenges that you face with people coming out of high school into university? What are the shortfalls? What are the gaps? And he rattled off very quickly 3 things: analytical skills, critical thinking skills, and communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
And problem solving, we can kind of figure that out. The road is closed, there's a detour. I can figure out how to get around that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's cool. But how can I create the process such that I don't run into that again?
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah.
The other point that he
That's a good
highlighted,
point.
it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Cause I always I don't think about the containment side, because that's not what I want. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I guess math physics, being my schooling, conditioned me differently. Science today seems to be a movable subject. In my world, it isn't. Science is black and white. It doesn't change.
Mm.
But we somehow have made that different. Momentum is momentum, weight is weight, and that's the end of that tune. And industrial engineering, like you say, there was weights, decisions, delays, lack of resources being people or tools or
Or
things.
money. Yep.
And those things are pretty straightforward. And when you start listing those things off, people understand it.
Yeah.
And they can solve that one problem. But they don't, once they're so, like you said, they're focused on problem solving, not problem avoidance. It's like firefighters.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks of a firefighter putting out fires. 95% of their time is avoiding fires in the first place, preventing them from happening. We don't think that way at work.
No, there's glory in being the fire, than putting out the fire.
Yeah, I guess
That's the
it,
problem.
yeah.
Is you're a hero when you put out a fire.
Yeah, everybody still talks about the firemen going up in the Twin Towers instead of everybody else is coming down, they're going up. They're heroes. But yeah, they don't think about the fact that 95% of their time. You ask people in the company, and you might have this in your process improvement. Are you working in the business or on the business?
Yeah, I hear that
all the time.
all the time.
And that's that I'm comfortable in my rut. I'm in the business. I'm not looking at how I could do this better. And that seems to the majority of the people,
Yeah.
Sarah. I don't know if we're ever going to break that logjam.
No, but I think I don't know that you can do it overnight, but I definitely think that if you try and you make momentum, you will create people notice and they'll try to make change happen themselves. So, I think that's why I wanted to write the blog in the first place, because if you find yourself, in a situation where maybe the direction from leaders aren't exactly clear, or you find yourself frustrated and you want to do something about it, you don't have to wait for permission. There's ways you can get around it. It's going to take longer. It's going to, you'll have to be creative in how you think about preventing the problem from coming back, right? And you have to think about communication. I think that's a really big lesson that I learned the hard way. You can't speak to people how you want to be spoken to. You need to speak to them in their language and what they want to hear, and understand what's going to resonate with them. When I was leading a team of data scientists, I absolutely loved getting into the detail and looking at the performance of the machine learning models and talking about feature engineering. But when I spoke those words to my leadership, they tuned it out. They didn't understand what I was talking about. So I think learning how to communicate with others and learning how to think like a marketer is something that is important for the people that are trying to evangelize continuous improvement.
Yeah, I say we have to be chameleons. We have to be what our audience expects us to be, which means we've got to fit into them. They don't need to fit into us. But it's like you say, we find things that we really, the data scientist side, they know what we're doing. This is cool. So let's go. We're in a freight train when I'm talking to the management, trying to figure out what we're doing, and the other guys, they're in a bullet train, and let's go. And that's part of the problem, isn't it, though?
Yeah. They don't teach that in school. I mean,
they don't teach that as parenting either.
No.
It's, I taught at university for 5 or 6 years. I've taught for 50 years of my life. And I say this quite nakedly to people. We are taught as people to be obedient. And it starts at home. Don't touch the stove. You're going to burn yourself. Look both ways. You're going to get hit by a car. All of this stuff. This is cursive writing, which we've dropped, but this is how you write. This is number theory. This is how you add, blah, blah, blah. Then you get out into the business world, and most people get hired. They're onboarded, whatever that means. They're trained on how to do the job by somebody, and it's the old-fashioned, like learning how to fly with assistance to assistance solo. And teaching, I used to call it show, tell, show, try. I'm going to show you what I want you to do. Then I'm going to tell you what I just showed you. Then I'm going to show you again. And then I want you to try it. And I'm going to be here while you try it. And that ends with the statement from the leader, whoever the trainer was, well, do this now because I want you to be able to do it more accurate, with more accuracy and faster. And that's how you get rewarded. And that's kind of, so if I'm a blacksmith, I'm going to be using a blacksmith theory that's 1,000 years old. Makes no sense whatsoever. We completely disable any thinking that the employee has about how to do the job.
Yeah.
That's our
approach.
Yeah, that's our culture, isn't it? And Japanese culture is totally different. How do they do that? I still don't know, because I've worked over there a lot. Every single person seems to be driven to do it better.
Imagine if everybody just felt that way, thought that way.
Yeah. And it's, it's a Western European style too. You go along to get along. We get criticized if we, you're walking outside the lines here. Don't do that. Get back here. Right?
Yeah.
And what did we do production line, Sarah? Didn't we start having this moving line that moved at a certain pace? And if we wanted to make more cars, we sped up the line without the employee knowing about it. And all of a sudden I realized they weren't able to keep up.
Keep up.
It's really remarkable. So starting from the middle allows people to start, allows people a taste of the improvement.
Yeah.
When you do that, do you find that they start questioning and challenging more things, or does it change at all?
No, I think once you start to question the status quo, I think it is easier to see the inefficiencies and get more frustrated with things that are not going well or are repeatable actions that don't add value. I definitely think that as you start down this path, it's a lot easier to identify them.
Yeah, I call those sacred cows. Those things they've been doing forever and don't. They're one of the U.S. Olympic teams had a clinical psychiatrist involved, I think in Mexico City, and he wrote a book. Sacred Cows Make Better Burgers was his book, and this is 40 years ago or more. And he had what he called sacred cow hunts. He would create a group of people, 2 or 3, in a company, and say, okay, go find something, anything. And paper forms. Have you ever gone through a process improvement that takes an inventory of every pre-printed form that a company uses? That's pretty sobering.
Yeah.
And then the frequency with which they're used, that's even more sobering. And one of my friends and colleagues, his name is Alex Schussler. He started Smart Equip, that smart guy, PhD, written a couple of books, and he says all we've done is we've taken a piece of paper form and put it onto the screen. So he calls it paper to glass. We haven't changed the process at all. We just made it faster.
Yeah, or longer, because in some cases it's.
Well, I wish I
actually
had
more time consuming
instead of 3 fingers, you know.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Every single corner you look at, forms, hours of work. Why do we do it this way? Why do we have 8 to 5 or whatever the hours of work are? Why don't we have 5 to 3?
Yeah, why not?
In Asia, the kids are going to school 5 days a week, but 10 hours a day.
Wow.
And they're tutored on Saturday. Everybody.
Oh man, my kids would that would be a shock.
my grandson, like, I didn't like going to school. I was doing too many other things. But so I'm a bad example. But somehow you could have caught me. You needed to attract me to do something. Same thing with an employee. How do we attract people to make things better? Well, first it starts with asking them to.
Yeah.
And they're going to look at you funny. What do you mean, do it better? How do I do that? Isn't that faster? No, it's not faster. How come we equate fast with better?
Well, sometimes you get a benefit of faster, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the goal.
It's not a race. It's not a race. We had the Honolulu Marathon was yesterday, 26 miles. And there's some people that take 10, 12 hours. They walk it. But how many people you know that are going to walk 26 miles? Not very many. That's kind of a cool thing. There's one couple that have done it for 50 consecutive years.
Wow.
And the people that do it fastest are running at 10.3 miles an hour.
Wow.
The average speed in cars in London, England today is 15 miles an hour.
Wow.
So continuous improvement, like you go back 50 years, we didn't have a 4-minute mile.
No.
You go back 50 years, we didn't have a 7-foot high jump, a 16-foot pole vault. all of these things constantly in athletics change. I don't know if you noticed, but Alex Kraft and I he did a blog on getting better.
Mhm.
And we did a podcast about it. He's athletic. He played basketball. He's
Okay.
used to, practicing, training, trying to get better, measurable things. And then he goes to work and it's not there anymore. If you aren't involved in athletics, you don't notice that. If you are involved in athletics, you do. And remarkably, the hits on that blog were one of the highest that we've ever had.
Wow.
It's just everybody's acknowledging, oh, darn it, that's true.
Yeah.
Continuous improvement, getting better.
Yeah.
At work, at a process, getting better as a person, employee development, seeking your potential. All of these things are related, aren't they?
They are.
So I'm taking you away from the article. What, other than starting in the middle and realizing successes to be encouragers, what are some of the other things that you'd like to highlight?
So I think the importance of like technology options is another one. I mean, I personally believe that software workflows, making it a system, implementing a system to drive a process is a good thing, because you have clarity on who's supposed to do what when. You get timestamps so you can measure how long things are taking to get through the process. You can identify where rework is happening. And so it's from a continuous improvement standpoint and analyzing a process, if it's in software, it's going to make a lot of sense, but not all companies have the opportunity to go out and buy commercially off the shelf software potentially. But there's alternatives now. There's all sorts of low code and no code tools out there. If your company is using Microsoft, there's Power Apps and there's free classes and YouTube tutorials and all sorts of resources out there where you can at least start and build something that you need to drive a process in a very cost-effective way, at least to show the value. And then, once you've proven that you can make a change to the process for the better, whether it's reducing waste or reducing rework loops, you can use that savings, that evidence to maybe purchase something that's more at scale.
How do you think we should deal with technological change? Is that something that we should maybe have a session with everybody in the company or everybody in the department, say, let's just look at telematics, or let's just look at sensors in componentry, or let's just look at fault codes? In my opinion today is our technological capabilities are so far outstripped what we've actually implemented. It's scary.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look at the chat conversational AI bought by OpenAI that just released, that caused a lot of buzz, right? I mean, it's the technology that's available is amazing and scary.
Yeah. How is it scary to you?
I think, especially in the space of AI, I think there's a big ethical concern. I would say it's really around that. Is it responsible? Is the AI, you read the stories about the Lensa app and ripping off artists' pictures and not giving them credit. And I mean, I don't know what is true or not true. I'm just spouting off what I've read, but AI can be it can have bias built into it that I think is concerning. And then at what point did the human data get replaced with the AI data? And now you're training your AI on data that it's already produced. Like, where does the human element kind of lose itself within it? I think that's, where it's scary for me.
Yeah, the ripping off the artist. think in terms of Spotify or iHeartRadio.
Mhm.
Or here's something that's relatively current. You realize in an electric vehicle, you don't have AM radio
Wow.
because of the electromagnetic fields that interfere with the signal coming from the AM radio
AM.
station. So what's going to happen to traffic reports and weather reports and those things? Are they going to go FM? Obviously, it's going to have to. Does this mean the end of AM radio stations?
Wow.
We electrify. It's a rather overpowering statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you know you couldn't get an AM station in an electric car?
Never thought of it, but I don't usually use it. But again, if there was an emergency, what would you do? You'd flip to the AM.
And recently Google, who owns Waze, is putting the two of them together.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that that's good or bad, because you open up the same thing, the scary aspect. Somebody puts a frivolous comment out there, there's a traffic jam on exit 20B. And there isn't.
Mm-hmm.
All of the people are going to go past a store that they wouldn't see if they got off at 20B, but they do see if they get off at 19A.
Oh, there you go. Advertisement.
It's kind
Free
of
marketing.
Yeah. So you wrote a song, like the argument between John Lennon and Paul McCartney about who wrote Imagine.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it's really weird where we go with these things. Look at the mess that the world is in, according to the people that have been on Twitter forever, now that Elon Musk has bought it.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting. He spent 44 billion of his own money to supposedly bring free speech to a platform that is causing all manner of problems.
Yeah.
So here comes a person that's involved in process for improvement. That guy is a pain in the butt. He's always coming through trying to change things. Makes my life really difficult. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think that's a
That's
good
tough.
question.
That's
That's a
tough,
tough
isn't it?
question.
That's tough.
I mean, I think in some cases you just find a different opportunity. I think that's always an option.
What that's trying to point out, at least from my point of view, Sarah, is that there is built-in resistance that at some point in time is going to say enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think having your own resilience is, you have to build resilience, and I just don't take no for an answer. If I believe in something and I want to make it happen, and you're going to put a wall in my way, I will find a way around that wall.
There's a Mexican proverb, you don't make a door by hitting your head against a wall.
No.
But you can walk around it.
Yeah. And
it's remarkable, isn't it? This is a tough subject. Change is a tough element. I teased in classrooms, if you think change at work is hard, tell your wife you're going to sleep on the other side of the bed.
oh no,
Ain't gonna happen.
not happening.
That's right. So tell me how the couch is.
Yeah.
And
Well, I like to think of myself as somebody that identifies things that bug me and find solutions to problems. But I have a chargeable nightstand thing that charges my phone, my watch, and my AirPods. And it used to bug me because there would be this green light, and I like to sleep in the dark. And it wasn't until almost a year of having it that I discovered there's an on-off button for the light.
it's the same thing with clock radios that are at your night table.
Yeah.
The more recent ones have an automatic dimming. It's only when they sense movement does the light come on. Because I'm like you, I like darkness, total darkness.
Yeah.
I
have an air filter, and I have to put, something over the LEDs because.
Yeah.
Nope.
But it's at work, making process improvements is critically important. If only because of the changes in technology. They're forcing us to make changes. We have to make changes if we want to live. The whole, look at what Amazon did to bookstores. Look
Yeah.
at what Walmart did to shopping centers.
Mhm.
All these things are changed. Walmart identified something. Bezos identified something. Zuckerberg identified something. Bill Gates, Elon Musk.
Mhm.
So there are these inventors. There's fewer, or there's more innovators, but there's still fewer innovators than there are workers. Any hope, do you think, to create a common worker as an innovator? How to turn them into innovators?
Well, I mean, first, everybody needs to accept the fact that creativity is possible within all of us. I think sometimes we lose sight of that as people. So I think if I wanted to, talk to company about that, I would go in with that message first. And there's ways to invoke creativity. You can do, if you're in a team meeting, you give everybody a new name and it just changes your standard thinking enough that the creative, wavelength starts to pick up. And then I also think there's got to be space to be able to think and improve. And so, instead of having that expectation of time on product, or that you have to have so many hours within a day only doing the output that you need to do, you need to carve out a portion to be able to allow for continuous improvement. And then I also think finally there's a reward and recognition. I think not just recognizing the firefighters for putting out the fires, but recognizing the people that are preventing them and having some sort of, formal recognition, even if it's just a thank you note from a leader, that can drive a lot to help reinforce changing your workers to become more like innovators.
The creativity statement you made is, I think, really powerful. Everybody is creative.
Everybody.
We think of creativity as artists or musicians or sculptors or something, but we're all creative. It's a function of human behavior.
Mhm.
And creativity in that sense, from my perspective, is that we all are capable of identifying solutions to problems we're facing.
Yes.
And we don't do enough training in business anymore. We don't do enough adult training, re-education. It's becoming more common, but one of the things that would be really nice would be to have a continuous improvement training session once a month. Just carving out some time that we're just going to take this thing on.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. We're considering making the start time of the company optional, as long as you're here between the hours of 6 to 9, and you will leave 8 hours later, 2 to 5. We're okay with that.
Mhm.
And having a discussion about that would blow people's minds.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. It would blow people's minds. Think in terms of Los Angeles traffic. I don't know if you've ever seen the 5-7 lane, 8-lane highway
It's
to
been
Los Angeles.
2 decades since I've been to LA, but it was bad then.
Largest parking lot in the world.
Mm-hmm. Except for the mopeds that are zipping around the cars and giving me a heart attack.
Yeah, pretty dangerous. But again, we almost become immune to thinking about that. Why the devil don't we have alternate hours for work? The reason we have those traffic jams is because everybody starts at the same damn time.
Yeah.
I thought working from home with the pandemic was going to change people's thinking. Not really.
No.
Some, yes, but it's the young folks. There was a statistic I saw the other day, 14 million people between the ages of 20 and 34 are not looking for work or working. They checked out. They've had an epiphany. They don't like what they see. They're not going to participate.
So what do?
They sit at home collecting unemployment or welfare. And they're happy. And I had an individual, it's different, right? I
Yeah.
had an individual I was talking with the other day, and she said to me, well, that's always been true. I said, really? She said, well, hasn't it always been true? I said, well, where are you getting the statistics? He said, well, I thought that a lot of young people didn't want to work. Not the generation that I grew up in. Everybody, when you finished school, you went to work, period.
Yeah. That was
You
true
were,
with mine.
you were trying to
You
get
went to
away from
college or
living
you
at
went and
home.
got a job.
You're trying to get away from living at home. Today, they're very comfortable living at home. The parents put up with it. Wait a second. It's really interesting to me. What you're looking at with start with the middle is, I think, just like getting better. I think it's
Yeah.
a very provocative thought. We've got to make change.
You've got to start.
I used to say, if things aren't changing, you're dead. If you're not learning, you're dead. If there's nothing else but just to sit back in a rocking chair, look at this horizon, you're dead.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm the one that's wrong. God forbid. Never happen.
Never. Infinitely correct.
So thank you for this discussion and your patience with me as we go through this, but I think it's a very important subject and a very critical subject for everybody to come to grips with. We need to make change constantly. We need to improve things constantly. The world around us is changing fast. Like Wells said, if the world around you changes faster than you do, the end is near.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to give us any sage closing comments?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about continuous improvement education. I think there also needs to be like continuous exposure to what's new, like without having too much hype, because unfortunately, when there is a lot of hype about something, people either feel really uncomfortable about it or they jump all in without understanding. But I think there needs to be some level of education on the new technology and where it can be relevant.
Taking the fear away, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think it's fundamentally fear or comfort with how we're doing it now?
I think it's probably both. I think with comfort of how things are in that status quo, there's also a side of fear to change. And that fear of unknown. So I think I don't really have one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very challenging subject. It's and I'm glad you're facing it head on with the start with the middle, because I think that's valid. And your starting point as to how that became important to you. The leadership of the company is in favor of continuous improvement and approves it and supports it. That's one thing, but there's an awful lot of leaders that don't. And if they don't, you can't sit on your hands and continue to do what you've always done. The end is near again.
You just gotta, it's okay to start. It's okay to, don't ask for permission. Just if you find an opportunity to drive improvement, just do it. Just start. And you'll eventually people will catch on to what you're doing and they'll be impressed. And then you're going to get recognition for it. I mean, it's where I'm at today versus where I was, 2.5, 3 years ago are very, very different. And it's literally boils down to believing that you can have an impact, understanding what you want to work on, breaking it down into small enough pieces that you can afford, and making those incremental improvements along the way. And you look back and wow.
I think it's accepting the fact that you have more potential than you're currently showing.
Mm-hmm.
Through the fact it's kind of like actual gross profit versus potential gross profit. There's always a potential that's greater than the reality. Mm-hmm. And technology is the thing that's driving this more than anything else. In the 50s and 60s, when the computers first came, there was a cartoon that had a button and a machine that was going to replace people. Not true. And that's kind of how it was presented. It almost, don't get involved with technology. It's going to replace your job. Don't let that happen.
But it'll change your job.
it'll improve your job, make your life easier.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. Look at
that's
some
the
of the
thing.
cobots that are out there now that are taking the the physical labor and those repetitive tasks that give you carpal tunnel and tennis elbow, and those things are terrible from an ergonomic standpoint. Give that repetitive work to a cobot and then allow yourself to do the more think required type work,
Yeah. It opens up a completely different vista. Ed Gordon, who did the Job Shop series, saying that 50% of the American workforce, 80 million people, will not have the skills to be employable, he says, by 2030. So I give him 10 years, but societally, that's a pretty scary thing to consider. But it's coming. My granddaughter, 21, just not a fan of capitalism. And she and my wife were chatting about it. And she said, well, what would you like instead? She said, I don't know. I just don't like this. What is it you don't like about this? Now, this is a kid who's going to get a master's by the time she's 22. So she's no slug. But so I'm talking to my daughter, her mother, about that very same thing a couple of days after that. And she said that she's weird because the schools here are really capitalist. It's an agricultural community where she teaches, and they're capitalists right from the get-go. They're workers. Yeah. She said, I don't know where Neve got that, but so this whole thing, like you just listed out, having the courage to improve things, recognizing that there's opportunities to be better, personally and professionally, recognizing that getting better is more happiness. It's not just more money. And that's not necessarily more work. It might not be recognition. I tease people, have you been thanked too much?
No.
Never. And think about bosses in companies. They always identify things that are screwed up. They see mistakes. You have to change your perspective to find good things that people are doing. And that's part of where, gosh, that's really good, George. Or Jack, when did you start doing that? That's fantastic. We don't do enough of that, do we? It's all part of the package, I think.
Yeah, that reinforcement is important for culture.
Yeah. I'm really pleased you brought the subject up because I think it's very pertinent and very valuable. So thank you. And thank you for this discussion and your patience with me as I try and walk my way through it myself.